Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of the xAPI cohort. We're thrilled to have you here as we explore this week's topic of how to build an L&D team that supports xAPI. Thrilled to have you all here. We've been just absolutely overwhelmed with the level of participation and enthusiasm we've seen in the cohort during the first 2 weeks, and we look forward to keeping that going this week. Before we jump into this week's session, I wanted to give you a couple of reminders of some of the other things that are going on in the xAPI community that you can take advantage of to expand your immersion into the xAPI specification and how we're supporting in our industry. The first thing I want you to be aware of is the xAPI user conference. That is taking place in just a couple of weeks, next month, as a pre-conference event to DevLearn. The xAPI user conference is a one-day event that takes place on Tuesday, October 25th, full of case studies and examples of and hands-on sessions on how to practically put this specification into use. You'll get to see all the different applications and how organizations are using it. It is the only one-day fully immersive conference that is exploring xAPI for individuals and organizations that are putting it into practice today and considering putting it into practice for tomorrow. And we're really excited to be introducing xAPI Hyperdrive as part of the xAPI user conference. Some of you might be familiar with xAPI Hyperdrive. We did it a few years ago with DevLearn, but we're bringing it back as part of the xAPI user conference. What Hyperdrive is it is a fast-paced competition where people and organizations that are putting xAPI into practice share their story in a rapid-fire format. They get 10 minutes to pitch their story, including the challenges that they had, the objectives that they had, and what they learned through the process and the impact that implementing xAPI has had. They give a 10-minute presentation to the audience and a panel of judges. The panel of judges score it, and we recognize the best application based on the judges' scoring of their applications. It's going to be a great way to learn for the attendees and a great way for you to consider showcasing the work that you're doing in your organizations around xAPI. So if you're interested in participating in xAPI Hyperdrive or learning more about it as an attendee, be sure to follow your email. We're going to be sending a special email to the cohort in the next couple of days. Applications for xAPI Hyperdrive we're going to be opening on Monday, and we'll have a short call for proposal period of about 2 weeks, where we'll be allowing people to submit their stories to participate in Hyperdrive. So we're really excited to be having that as part of the event this year. And we also have, if you're interested in taking a deep practical dive, the xAPI Accelerator Certificate Program that takes place at DevLearn on Sunday and Monday, October 23rd and 24th. That's being led by Jeff Batt, who's been a part of this cohort many times. It's going to be a very in-depth 2-day program where you can learn a lot more about what's going on and how to if you're looking to just jumpstart your application of xAPI in your organization, this is a great opportunity to do that. 2 very, very deep dive days that you can do. So check that out. All of these details are available on the DevLearn website, devlearn.com, for all the details. And if you want to learn more or ask any questions about this, after the session, you might have seen in the AirMe platform that there are tables where you can get together and chat amongst yourselves. I'll have a table set up after this session. You'll see it labeled xAPI at DevLearn. If you have any questions or you want to learn more about what we have going on there, feel free to join me at that table. I'll be there for a little bit after this session, answer any questions people have. Before we do that, we have this session that we have today. Want to also remind you, we have lots of resources at the Guild site, learningguild.com. You can learn about all the different resources we have there and become a free member at learningguild.com if you're not already there. But we have today's session. Really excited for today's discussion, where we are going to be discussing the team that you need to support xAPI in your organization. It's an important component of it, and we are privileged to have with us here today Amy Parent, the Director of Learning Ecosystem at Salience Learning. Amy, thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to the xAPI cohort.
Thank you, David. Really excited to be here. Love the xAPI cohort. I've been lurking, participating, I think since 2018, maybe 2016. We established this last time, and I've lost count. But really excited to be able to share with you a little bit about what we're doing at Salience Learning to try and really leverage xAPI and what it's taken to do that. So I invite this to be a conversation. Of course, I'll be sharing, and I have, visual guidance for us to have that conversation. But at any point, please use the chat for your questions and use your reactions, and also feel free to interrupt. So let's go ahead and get this started. Okay. So the first thing that I want to share in terms of the perspective that I'm bringing today, it's really one that is from an organization's perspective, and also an organization and a team that's really responsible for designing, developing, and delivering learning at the end of the day. This isn't specific to any particular department or any particular team within organizations. So I just kind of want to give you a little bit of that grounding from where I'm coming from today. But I do hopefully what I share with you in terms of what I've learned and where we are and where we know we want to go next in developing this team will be transferable for your situation too. So the first question I needed to step back and ask myself when I wanted to share all of this with you was, well, what is a team? And from that perspective, what does it really take to leverage xAPI? So I really wanted to. It's one thing to what does it take to build, right? What does it take to like send that statement? But then what's the point in doing all of that if you're not going to have a team who can actually use it for good purpose? So it kind of encompasses that whole sphere. The first thing I think about is your design team, from the very beginning, knowing where you want to go, why you're designing, what outcomes you're after. We often think about tools like surveys and things towards the end of the learning, um, traditionally, in terms of really measuring that and understanding that. But with xAPI, what your team needs to be able to do is think about all of those opportunities both before and within the learning, because xAPI offers you the chance to collect that data in different formats. So you need a team who can actually engineer in during the design and the architecture process those key moments that are going to output data with the intention of supporting some larger performance goal or outcome. You need to think about that from the get-go and in the architecture. And so that becomes a key part in what's going on in the build. And sometimes either the same people, it depends on the size of your organization. But it is from there, then you need to be able to have the tools and the individuals who know how to take that architecture and that design and turn on xAPI in that build, right? Put in the data calls, the things that are going to actually export those statements for you, and how to get that to happen. And then I'd also say once it's built, as part of the delivery, you need a team who knows how to not only deliver it in the right format, whether it be an LMS or a website or Slack or however you're doing it. If you have the xAPI in there, you need to be able to capture those statements too. So you have to be thinking about not only how you're going to deliver it, but your team needs to be able to also capture those statements and know how to get the tools that you're using to do that. And then, of course, finally, do it in a compliant and secure way. So I'd say these first 4 elements are really all about what am I going to build, where and how do I put that into my learning assets? How do I make sure that all that time and effort actually gets collected, that data actually gets captured, and I have the right systems and tools for doing that? And that those systems and tools are adhering to, best practices around safety and security policies in my organization. And then I'd say the entire opportunity here is around what you use that data for, which is already thought about, from the very beginning. So you do need a team that can actually query and pull that data out, put it into a format that is usable, and then be able to communicate it to stakeholders in a salient way. So I'm just going to step out for a second because the next place I'm going to go to here is kind of looking at each of these individual and really looking at what is the exact skill really that you need. I mean, I have people who know how to, do instructional design. So what's xAPI have to do with that? What's the additional skill? But I want to just check in with everyone to see, what kinds of questions might be coming up before I move forward there. Give a few seconds. Imagine that several third-party apps that would bridge this gap. Yeah, okay, great, Jessica. Yeah, so the one thing I won't do in the session, which I'm happy to share my experience later, is about infrastructure and approaching that infrastructure. I think that's a different topic, but yes, you do need people who understand systems well. And it might be you, Jessica. You might know more than you think to be able to start to make some of those decisions. Okay. All right, so let's carry on. Share screen. Okay. So let's start with the designing side of it. I'm not going to speak to the obvious, right, when it comes to designing, but what I'm really going to speak to are what are the specific skills as it relates to leveraging xAPI. And I'll make some references to potential roles, but I think these all can vary greatly, depending on your organization. And I'll point out straight away that I play many of these roles within my own organization. We're very small. And other organizations will have, specific individuals. So the person who is the instructional designer or playing that role, I would argue, is usually the person who is involved in identifying those moments within the learning design where the xAPI data statements are going to be generated. You'll hear me say like the outputs. What are the inputs that are going to produce the outputs for that statement? An input might be a button, and then the output is the statement attached to that action. So you do need, I would argue, you do need to be familiar with xAPI, the concept at least. It's helpful if you know the structure, so then you can kind of predict and think a little bit more creatively and broadly where those opportunities are in your learning. And knowing that profile, or at least knowing it exists so that you can reference it, is helpful. Even within some of your cohort projects, you may find that you will have to play this role of actually providing guidance on what that statement is, especially if you're working with a developer who's really not as familiar with it, but they know how to make it happen. They're going to look to you for that guidance about, okay, you want an xAPI statement on this button. What kind of verb do you want associated with that? I'd say it is the main shift in design thinking here is really thinking more deeper and with a plan in your design, in your user flow, where those moments are going to be. And that's been really helpful for us. For example, we worked in intentionally this one particular learning moment where the learner, we asked them to create and implement like a micro plan, an if-then plan, if you will. And we built it so that when they have a place where they can type their plan in, and when they hit submit, it is that which is the statement that gets sent. So we could have just built the plan like we have in the past, but since we know xAPI and we have a system that capture it, now we have the actual data and we're not just guessing and relying on the learner to tell us what their plan is. So that's fun. So the other thing is building it, right? So you got all your statements outlined. You might put them in a spreadsheet. You might work it into your storyboards, whatever works best for your team. But then your developer has to execute on it. So the developer at this point, which may be the same person, needs to know a couple different things. you do need to know how to export your learning or deliver your learning in a format that's going to work for generating xAPI. And a lot of your development tools now have that as an export option. And of course, we're just waiting for CMA5, to take hold to kind of simplify that for us. But you also need to be familiar with the verb library. You need to be familiar with the data structure, because you could be in a situation where you have to follow a build flow. So for example, my team uses Domino 1 as our development tool, and we don't necessarily need to know code to build custom xAPI statements, but we do need to know what this little panel with things to fill in is really talking about. So you have to understand the xAPI structure a little bit, and you can learn it through trial and error as to how to build your statement and get the statement you're looking for, because that could always be fun. And so I would say, as an additional skill to take that up a level, being able to configure those data triggers, those custom ones, and it is an additional skill that will vary depending on the development tools you're using. So if you're building an xAPI around a video, you're likely going to have to leverage some kind of a wrapper, or really kind of get into code to make that happen. And know a little bit of that if you're using other tools, maybe like Captivate or Articulate, and you want to go beyond the out-of-box xAPI capabilities that are there. So again, getting started, I'd say, you're up in these areas. You got to know the basics, right? What it is, know what your tool can and can't do there, and just have a level of familiarity. When you want to get into more custom and complex, then you need people who are a little bit more code savvy, at least with that tool on the back end. So we've got it designed, we've built it. Now we need to get it out there is the next phase. And the person who's responsible for doing that is often usually someone who's running that delivery system. It might also, depending on how you're delivering this, include someone like a data engineer or a data architect. So these people in particular, they need to know their systems really well. They need to know from the very get-go, hey, is our system even capable of supporting xAPI? Meaning, if I build statements into this learning experience, are we going to be able to capture that data? Or are we really just going to be able to capture basic SCORM data still? So you need to know the system. They need to know the system. They need to be able to tell you, what format, what you need to do with that learning to make sure that can happen. And then whether or not that system has the LRS Learning Record Store database built in and accessible to them, or it needs to be connected to an external, LRS that you already have running within your organization. So this space gets a little bit into infrastructure, and I would say these folks need to know that infrastructure in order to support, your xAPI initiatives. And it's always going to depend on what you have in place and what you can start with. When I first came to Stillions Learning, they had a learning management system in place. It didn't support xAPI. We built the xAPI into our learning anyway, and then we also simultaneously began the process of finding a different delivery solution that would capture that data for us. It doesn't have to stop you. You could just make a plan. So we've got it out there. The data is being collected. That's always exciting. But now we need to make sure that the data, our decision making in that infrastructure, and the way we're treating that data and handling that data and processing that data is all in compliance. So I'd say the people who are usually involved in this part of the process, and of course, hopefully you've figured out by now it's not linear, um, are your key decision makers. Often it'll involve people who know the systems very well, infrastructure very well, and these policies well. It could be your IT folks, um, legal, but it should be a key person who's rounding that collaboration up for you. So for me, I'm the director of learning ecosystems, and this is a big part of my job. Before we even went live with anything related to our xAPI, we went through a rigorous audit, both with the vendors that we selected and ensuring that we had everything in alignment with the basics around both GDPR and US laws, knowing, these days that global delivery is very real. So if you're in a role like me, you need to already have this on your radar and start. You don't need to know it, but you need to know who to talk to and be able to explain, how this does or doesn't relate to the work that you're doing in learning and delivering learning. And then let's get back to, querying and analyzing that data. So this can live in separate spaces. It depends, again, on how your organization is structured. For me, this is, I'm living the ecosystem director role. I'm also providing guidance with the LMS admin and the design and development team. And then I'm also the person who has the skill to be able to do this right now and are looking to upskill others within our company to be able to do this moving forward. So if you already have data analysts in-house, this is an easy transition for them. A lot of your LRSs really just require basic skills for querying databases. It does help if they understand, and I'd say it's probably a requirement at the end of the day to understand the structure of xAPI so they know how to both unpack the code and meet your query requests, but then also query it appropriately. And ideally, I know for us, for our future state here, is a lot of this is all being shuffled over, to kind of a, if you will, a learning analytics platform space, a BI tool, someplace where we already kind of have some of these queries already set up so anybody can go in and take a look at this data in a very easy way. But until you're in that place, you do need someone who knows how to navigate that and do some basics around analyzing data. We're still using Excel. We haven't evolved to, connecting our databases yet to something more sophisticated. And it's working. It's getting us done. It's a little slower, but that's where we're at right now. And yes, I do need to know how to read the statements to make sure I can get the data that I was hoping to get in the query. And it can be a bit of a library that you end up building for yourself. And then finally, being able to then take that data and present it in a way that's meaningful and helpful for people. And this is trial and error, where this takes, skill in presenting, skill in visualization of data. And you may already have that talent in other places that you hadn't thought about, depending on the size of your organization and what you're always doing. These could be some of your business data analysts and people who are responsible for doing, metrics at that level. Even just talking to them and getting ideas is a great place to start. You do need to have some business acumen here. What might be interesting to you or to one team's a group of stakeholders is not going to be what's interesting to exec level leaders. So you do need to adjust and have that ability to do so, depending on who you're presenting this information to for decision making. And I think I always like to tell people this around data. Data, a lot of the times this data is really just evidence that helps us open up more questions and get curious to really understand something more. There might be things that get revealed that we just weren't on our radar, and now we have information that allows us to recognize it, but then ask more questions about what this is and why it's happening. So the curiosity and that critical thinking and strategic thinking skill set is really important when you're looking at data. So I'm going to stop there for a second, because that was a whole bunch of stuff. And I'd like to see what's coming up for people. What questions do they have? How many hats in there do you think you'll be wearing? Let's see. All right, so I'm looking at the questions, and Josh, just give me a second to read your question here. Beyond the cool factor, I find one big challenge is convincing learning manager, higher leadership the reasons for investing. Oh yeah, I've actually run into this, and my way of tackling it at the time was to run just a mini proof of concept. I mean, really mini, and I used all the freebie stuff I could find. So going into infrastructure a little bit, but SCORM Cloud, right? It has a built-in LRS. You can send statements in there. You can extract those statements for analysis. All you need is some way to capture it. SCORM Cloud, again, has a library and a way that you can capture it. It's minimal in terms of how big the learning is that you can put up there, and how many people you can invite in. But sometimes just a little proof of concept with a really interesting use case and a set of data that you can put out is one way that you could think about that. But David, I don't remember, but do you have someone on the agenda later in the cohort who might be able to speak to this more? I can't remember. So happy to exchange more ideas with you, Josh, if you want to talk more. Jessica, you asked. Oh, go ahead, David.
Yeah, we do have some of that that's going to be covered in one of the later sessions, so be on the lookout for that.
All right, cool. Jessica, you ask, I would imagine that there will be several third-party apps that would bridge this gap. So, Jessica, if you wouldn't mind elaborating on what you mean by bridge this gap for me. Happy if you want to come off mute and just ask, go ahead, or just do a follow-up question on that. Oh, it says answered. Okay. Charlotte, how does a shift to xAPI involve the work of non-L&D folks? Example, attaching xAPI statements to performance tasks done on the job, but outside the LMS. Yeah, so there are different tools. I don't know, I think xAPI is a tool that Torrance Learning offers, I believe, to help with that. I know I've used other systems that allow people to log in and do that performance xAPI statement observation sort of thing. So I would encourage you to explore that with the group in the Slack channel, because there are cohorts in the past and projects in the past and people in this group who could probably point you to some different apps for that. But again, all of that data needs to be shuffled to a central location. It might have its own LRS, but you need to pull in someone who can connect all of those to maybe some larger data pool, or have those statements forward to a central LRS that you're treating as your main. Little bit of infrastructure there. And then let's go on to Vinny. How do you expect xAPI to interact with Hadoop ecosystem? Oh, I don't know. I'm not familiar with Hadoop, but send me some information in LinkedIn, and I, of course, would be curious to learn more. And do you think a singular big data team would use both in tandem? Yeah, when it comes to big data teams, generally speaking, you're getting into some data engineering and architecting, and typically there's a lot of connecting of multiple databases into either a lake or some common BI tool. So it wouldn't be unheard of for a large data team to be shuffling data in from different databases like an LRS. Again, the skill you need there is someone who can make those connections for you. And what would you say is the initial investment to start using xAPI? Yeah. So it varies in terms of what infrastructure needs you have and what infrastructure you want to build. I mean, for us at a minimum, we needed a delivery system. So we went with an LMS that is, B2B. It serves customers best because that's the business that we're in. If you're an organization and you're only serving, your employees, and your LMS options are pretty broad. You need a LRS if it doesn't already come with the LMS to start with. We're using a system that comes with the LRS, has Learning Locker on the back end. Our particular system, gave us an instance of that to work from. And so as we continue to scale, we'll evolve into our own LRS where we'll be forwarding those statements to. But right now, that's what's working, and it's what's financially makes sense. Your most expensive investment will be those tools, and then finally your development suite. We made a decision at Salience Learning to go with a learning content management system, and we went with Domino One for lots of different reasons. And it is a license-based suite, no different than Captivate, anything Adobe. So it's just whatever's going to meet your needs and can do the level of xAPI you're looking for. But those, I'd say, are your key things right there. Way to deliver it, an LRS, if it's not already attached, and then a way to build your statements. All right, and I'm just going to pause on questions just for a second because I just want to paying attention to time, and I want to make sure that I wrap this up for you. Share screen. Okay. So I wanted to show you a little bit how it's working for us. You could have all these different roles, or, you could have a couple of individuals playing several of these roles, which is the case of Salience Learning. So Salience Learning, we took these categories and buckets, and you'll see that in the learning design and the development space, we have a lot of people in-house and also third-party vendors that we work with to help build and design our learning. And in particular, it is these individuals, the developers and the IDs, that have the xAPI skill set, and we require that skill set when we work with them. Video production and writers, not so much, and anyone else you want to throw into your learning design and development team. But for us, this is where we're at, and it's with what we're building. When it comes to implementation, we have two sets of admins. We have one person who's really great with the delivery, the LMS in this particular case. She understands the system. She understands the basic specs. She's growing in her xAPI skill. I'm coaching her. She's going through training. And the LRS admin right now is myself mainly, but her also as part of her training and familiarity. I'm the one who has the skill to query and understand that infrastructure for Learning Locker. And it's going to vary a little bit by LRSs. Everybody approaches that, but the foundation of every LRS is pretty much the same. And then we have our implementation or our enabling consultants, whatever you want to call them. These are the people who actually make sure that our customers or our employees have what they need in terms of their learning, and they don't really need to know the xAPI side of the house at all. Our team also consists of learning analysts and a group of folks who oversee an audit for infrastructure and governance around security. So the xAPI skills, that I just talked about are required again for the LRS admin for analytics, querying, and exporting, but also, just a basic ability to export and that data for people to visualize. The infrastructure and governance is a collaboration. So this is where I sit here, but I work with IT, I work with legal, and I work with our customers and our clients too when they have special questions and needs in this space. So this is what it looks like for us when we actually put it into practice. Give you a minute to take a look at that. And at the end of the day, you need folks who have these basics down. They know the spec. They know the spec in terms of the structure. They can at least read the code, which is important for being able to interpret and query your data. And they know enough about the spec to be able to determine if an LMS or an LXP or a custom-made tool or website is going to be able to capture that data and shuttle it over to your LRS. You need to know systems. And the xAPI cohort is a great place for you to just get the basics around both of these starting last week, right? So, be exploring your standards. If SCORM, you've heard of it, but you're not really sure how it's different than xAPI. CMI5 is the future. This is a great place where you can start to safely explore that, ask questions, and get resources that you need. You need to know that xAPI is one of the interoperability standards, meaning it's what helps systems talk together. And so these are the kinds of things that you need to be looking for when you're doing your decision making with your infrastructure. This one just makes things easy when it comes to updating. You also need to, the more you understand this better and the more you start exploring and experimenting with these systems, the more you can start to recognize what true conformance really looks like. And you've heard some people say, the SCORMified xAPI, it used to be complete, now it's experienced or something like that. What does that look like compared to more sophisticated tools and the ability to use a broader range of verbs in that library? And then to really turn it on, right, brush up on some of your basics with data analysis, starting with simple bar graphs. There's no harm in starting with the basics in terms of how many, the amount, the percentage. And then as you understand the questions that you want to answer, they'll get more sophisticated, and then so won't your analysis. But it doesn't have to be that crazy. So and then finally, just like you need to know your learning systems and be familiar with that space, you also need to have a good sense of the development tool space too, especially if you're designing, your typical digital learning stuff out there. And then what are the things that you can put around stuff, things like videos or maybe even PDFs if it's not already something you can do within your learning system. So that is a little bit of a summary over the last, I've been, working to build teams and put xAPI in, into practice across 2 different organizations now. The Salience Learning Organization has been the broadest opportunity that we've had, and we're really the team's excited and enthusiastic about it and really supportive. And that says a lot to your first question around buy-in. So I'm going to stop rambling on here for a second and come back and see what other questions you might have. All right, so Kara, I'm taking a look at a question that you sent here. The initial, all right, I talked about the initial investment. It's going to depend on your infrastructure and the choices that you make there and the tools based on how you want to leverage xAPI. It could be a lot of free stuff. You need a proof of concept. It's completely possible to a minimal investment to at least get your foot out the door so that you can scale to something bigger. And still trying to conceptualize practical use cases. Here are a couple of simple ones. Yeah. Oh, so the micro plan I thought was a really interesting use case because we actually can capture the statements. And we've also built a pre and a post, kind of like a self-assessment, and then a follow-up assessment on some of the key behaviors that we teach in one of our courses. And so what we've been able to do is, rather than using a typical survey tool, which we used to, we actually built a survey, and each question sends its own xAPI statement with the result that the user chose. So we can download all that data in the self-assessment, and then we can do it again in the post-assessment. So we can have a comparative analysis, and we can holistically tell the story of that data with data around what people submitted for their if-then plans. So the question becomes, Gauthami said that she had this goal when she came into the program, right? We capture that. What's her initial goal? She then, as she progressed, started putting these things into practice. That was her if-then plan, her set of if-then plans. I'm going to start practicing this behavior in this situation. And before she came to the program, she said she was using these behaviors a lot and these not so much. But now that she's come out of the program, we've seen a shift in this direction around some of these behaviors, and check it out, the if-then plans are representative of that. So that's an example, I think, maybe, Kara, of how, as a designer, you're thinking already where in the learning you're going to capture data and the story that you want to tell in the data that you're capturing, because this is the performance goal that we have. I hope that answers your question. And then finally, let's see, Martin, you mentioned what kind of educational background would you expect applicants' various roles to have? Comp science, education? Yeah, so this is an interesting question. I'd say we all come from different backgrounds. I think what drives this is your interest and your desire to learn in this space. I came from an educational technology background. Instructional technology media management was my master's degree, but it was during a time when you had to know HTML to build anything digital learning, right? So I'm aging myself a little bit. I wouldn't expect people to know right away how to do these things, but I would hire someone who has at least a minimal ability to work in tech systems. They know how to use development tools. They have experience putting custom variables together, maybe. And that's a great foundation. And then you onboard them, you bring them to the cohort, you share them, the basics of xAPI. There's a ton of resources out there, and you'd be surprised how far that'll get you with someone who has a really strong desire to learn and continuously learn. For things more sophisticated, like your architectures and your data engineering and all that, yeah, you need someone who knows how to plug all that together and build the query dashboards that you need if you go to that extreme. But I hope that answers that question. And David, I see you've made your presence. I will pass it back over to you, but first I want to say thank you. And you guys can find me on LinkedIn and reach out anytime. And I'll be in the cohort too. See you in the Slack channel.
Amy, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us here today. A virtual round of applause from everyone in the group here for being a part of us and sharing with us here. Before we close, I just want to remind people of two things. One is I did see some comments in chat about people who were feeling a little overwhelmed by all the different stuff that needs to be learned to implement xAPI. And we see that, we understand that there's a lot to take in here. And we had some behind the scenes stuff while that session was going on. First off, I want to remind everyone there's a huge number of resources at xapicohort.com in terms of the history of this cohort over 12 different curriculum years of curriculum cohorts there. Lots of videos that can do that. We're going to curate a kind of a foundational list of some of those previous things and include it in an email that we send out before next week's session. So anyone who wants to look at some of that foundational stuff to kind of shore up some of the stuff that's there, we'll curate a list of some of the previous things that you can use as a resource for that. And again, as a reminder, if anyone has any questions about anything related to the cohort, or if you want to learn more about some of the deep dive stuff that we're doing at DevLearn, immediately following this session, I'll be opening up a table that you can join me, ask any questions you want. We'll be there for a little bit afterwards. So again, we'll close this session by saying thank you for being a part of the cohort. And Amy, thank you again for joining us here today. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.